What's good, everybody? It's your boy Big Nate. Welcome back to Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews. Today we have a very special video in store, one I've been working up to for a while. We are going to be tier ranking, about 70 or so modern classics. I've tried to find a nice blend between books that are personally important to me, but also recognized by the canon, and also books that haven't been too many years since I've read. So I'm super excited to do this video, but of course, before we get into any of that, this is Big Nate's Book Reviews, of course. So we gotta spark the doobie. Big Nate gang already knew that. They've been waiting on it. So if you got your doobie at home, go ahead and spark that. Today we're gonna be smoking this one for all these authors in proportion to where I rank them on the list. Also, we busted out the big guns. I got a nice cup of Americano. So we got the doobie, we got the Americano, and we got 70 dope ass modern classics. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Okay, so first let me break down the different levels of the tiers. So at the top of the top, we have the all-time favorites. These are the creme de la creme of the modern classics that I have read. These are books that I think will be all-time favorites throughout my entire life, ones that I hope to, revisit and reread, have had a big impact on me, this, that, and the other. Just below that, we have not quite the 1%, but still amazing books. So these are books that are just, I recommend these for everybody to read, still fantastic books, but, just not quite at that S tier. In the middle here, we have This Is a Fire Book, just plain and simple. I'm glad I read this. Is it amazing? Not necessarily, but it's still a really great book. So, it's fire. I'd say yes, it's fire. Below that, we have It's a Good Book, glad I read it, but it has flaws. So these are the books that ultimately, these are probably around the 3-star range. They're still good books. They were still worth the time, but they do have, noticeable major flaws. And then finally, we have just straight up flat out mid. Anything below mid, I'm simply not reading. I will DNF if it drops even to mid, but definitely not below that. So that is the general ranking list. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of pull out these randomly. Let's start with Memories, Dreams, Reflections by Carl Jung. That's gonna be an all-time favorite. We're gonna start off with a strong one here. And this is essentially Jung's autobiography, but he does it in a very special way, I think, where he's constantly infusing it with his own philosophy and his life experiences. And that's actually to the point. His life experiences are inseparable from his philosophy. From a very early age, Carl Jung has been having these really mystical, supernatural experiences, relations with dreams. So it's natural and in fact inseparable from the fact of his professional work in psychology and psychoanalysis. For one, I think it's just fantastically written. Jung, as far in all the books that I've read, is just a brilliant writer. And then we have Jung kind of at his most seasoned age. I forget, he was a very old head at this point. This was the last book he read. I think he died shortly after. He might not even have finished it, although don't hold me to that. But he's reflecting on his life and he's not painting it. He even makes a point to say, I've interacted with a lot of, important people and took place in a lot of important events. So something that a biographer, for instance, would include in Jung's description of his life. But Jung wanted to take this opportunity to really write about his own actual experiences that had a formative impact. So he's like, these might not necessarily be the most important objectively, but they're the most important to me subjectively. So on so many different levels, I fuck with this book, and that is what makes it an all-time favorite. Okay, so let's see. Random. The Sound and the Fury. This one is tough because... Okay, so for one, let me just say, this book has flaws. It is borderline unreadable at times, and I get why he's doing that. I literally, when I was reading this, there's so many weird, italicizes and things with punctuation, and sentence fragments just get broken off. I'm like, my publisher fucked up. There is no way this is the right book. But as it went on, I kind of realized it was a stylistic thing in terms of, the stream of consciousness kind of writing, which honestly, I'm not a big fan of. I think it's just a highfalutin justification sometimes for just gobbledygook writing. But the thing is, Faulkner, when he is good in this book, is actually really brilliant. He'd be up here on the amazing favorites. So Faulkner is a good writer. There's no denying that. But this book, can we put it in the average? Is that okay? Fire book. I don't know if I'd call The Sound and the Fury a fire book. But the thing is, there are some really brilliant moments in it. But it's just... We'll leave it there for now. We'll put it at the average. That one was kind of an interesting one. Okay, let's see where the mouse takes us. Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut. This is on the longer end of books that I wanted to include in this, and it's, it's been many years since I've read this. However, I remember this being one of those books that actually kind of got me into literature and just really opened up what was possible. And Vonnegut is really cool because he's he's like quirky, he's witty, he's got these crazy out there ideas. Like I would consider this kind of like a piece of science fiction, but at the same time it's deeply literary as well. And that's, I think, how I describe all of Vonnegut's style. And just for the feeling that this book gave me, even though it's been many years, like if you were to ask me right now, I would put it up in this class. And I think that's to a testament to the fact that I still have that feeling after all these years. Let me know if I'm capping, but I'm pretty sure that one's gonna hold up. And in fact, I should really reread The Sirens of Titan. Okay, up next we have The Human Stain by Philip Roth. I'm gonna say good book, glad I read it, but it has flaws. I just didn't really like his writing style. It was very like drawn out, big words, kind of trying to sound deeper than you really are. But at the same time, there actually was some really good stuff, the characters, the themes, the story. I did like, this is exactly how I describe it. It's a good book, I'm glad I read it. But, you know, the writing style personally just didn't super jive with me all the time. But I know he's like, you know, famous author. That's a very famous book. Covered, in fact, by the Yale online course on YouTube. So, of like the Great American Novel or something like that. Up next, let's do The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. I'm going to put this in the... I could go either way. So this is a book just about the universal nature of mythology. The Hero with 1,000 Faces is kind of in the title. You have these mythological stories and themes that pop up everywhere around the world. It's the same story just with 1,000 different faces, which take on the local costumes, he even says, of the culture. This is like the really fleshed out philosophy of Joseph Campbell as compared to something like The Power of Myth, which while I'm here, I'm gonna put The Power of Myth personally kind of an all-time favorite, and that's almost more so like a subjective thing. I don't know if that's how it's going to be for everybody, but my experience with this book, where I was just wandering around this bookstore that I'm always at, just in kind of in a different section, and I saw this and it just kind of spoke to me, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure in the back of my mind, I'm pretty sure I've heard of this book before. And I was going to my grandparents' house where I was just there for a few days, and I really just like sat there and read this, and it was just like a revelation to me seeing, it's really the same ideas. The Power of Myth is just like the condensed interview version of The Hero with 1,000 Faces. So for that reason, and just again my experience with it, I'm putting this one at an all-time favorite. The problem too with The Hero with 1,000 Faces is it can get a little kind of like academic theory, and there's like a whole psychoanalysis in terms of Freud, but kind of like with the weird mother stuff, which to be honest, it is kind of facts, but it just gets a little like too deep into that at times. But both of these books are fantastic and extremely formative to my own like interests and reading styles right now. But okay, let's give the mouse another spin, and we have Beloved by Toni Morrison. Honestly, I kind of just want to put this in terms of its importance and its themes and all that, and it's like, especially in terms of just American literature, I kind of want to put it here. But if I'm going based on my own true reading experience, I'm putting this is a fire book. Her prose is very lyrical and poetic, but the thing with that is sometimes it kind of trails off into my critique of that kind of writing style in general, which is just a little just gobbledygook. It's just putting in these words that sound good. And I'm not saying that's what she's doing. I'm just saying sometimes it could err on that side in comparison to something like the Song of Solomon, which for me is in that amazing zone. I would honestly be tempted to put this in an all-time favorite. I think I need to hit a reread and see how it holds up on that. But so just to be on the judicious side, I'm gonna put it on the amazing. But this is a really great book, and I would recommend as the starting point for Toni Morrison. She just covers all the bases, the characters like Milkman and guitar and the dialogue, and this is where the lyrical poetic prose actually works. This is where it's just downright beautiful, and the story itself is also, like, in terms of the plot, surprisingly good. And of course she talks about the African American themes, like the more slavery related ones, for instance like Beloved. That's kind of in the background for sure. It's more from like a historical aspect, but she really focuses on like the modern black experience, and maybe even particularly you could say in the South, which, so all of that combined in just like this beautiful, honestly, the way I'd be talking about it, let's tentatively put it in the all-time favorites, and I think it honestly would hold up to a reread, but I think that's kind of got to be a key thing for that top tier. But I'm gonna put her there for now. Okay, let's do The Teachings of Don Juan by Carlos Castaneda. So I'm gonna say this is a fire book. I really like the ideas in this book. Like, it's basically just this dude who gets apprenticed by like a shaman, a native Yaqui shaman who has, you know, a genuine magical spiritual experience with hallucinogens. And there's tons of great insights in here. I think Carlos Castaneda himself, frankly, is a bad writer at times. And this book can also get very into like almost the nitty gritty of how he prepares all these, which is cool, admittedly. But I don't need to hear the whole like several pages of like how you're drawing a root and laying it out for this many days. Although again, I kind of go back and forth because there's actually a huge spiritual element to even the preparation of it. But anyhow, I did a whole video on that, so if you're interested, get there. But honestly, with me just looking at this place, like, is it on a Beloved and The Sound of the Fury kind of makes sense, but I'm going to put this, I think I really just like the ideas of this book, and there are some really great passages, but I'm going to say it's a good book. Glad I read it. It has flaws, with the caveat that this is very much like up my alley. But okay, let's do the next book, which will be On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I'm going to put this as a fire book. I thought there's a lot of really good stuff. It really captures that kind of fun element of going on a road trip, and just that, you know, that freedom where you're just living, drifting along, and also the character work in this, because, you know, the road trip has a way of also bringing you closer to a person, for better or worse. I just feel like this really captured a vibe, and especially that vibe of just going on the road trip with the homies, having a good time, bumming around, and just living wherever the breeze takes you. So at times I did feel like this book was kind of like repetitive, and at times it could also drag and stuff. So just in terms of like the writing, like, in all of these, by the way, are still fire books. But so I'm gonna leave that tentatively. I'm gonna leave that there. Okay, and now that we've got the doobie resparked, let's get into the next one, which is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I'm gonna be honest, this is probably my least favorite book by him. I may dare say, I'm gonna put it as this is a fire book. It is still McCarthy. It's still got some fantastic dynamics with the father and the son, and just like this post-apocalyptic world. But at times it did feel a little bit like repetitive, like, yes, it's raining ash, yes, we can't find food, and the dialogue is very sparse, which is kind of like the cool part about it. But overall, I'm gonna just have to throw it here. And you know, this is a fire book. The Road is good, but like I said, it's not my favorite Cormac, and I do have some little critiques. So up next, what are we gonna get? Let's do Dune by Frank Herbert. I'm gonna put this also as a fire book. And the thing is, some elements of this book I think are really great, almost in like that amazing category with just like the world building and like the philosophy underlying this whole thing. Like, Dune really does have its own sort of world contained within it. But at times, I feel like the writing could really drag. Sometimes to me, it was trying to be philosophical, but it was just like straight up nonsense. Maybe I need to give it another pass, but the good elements of this book are really good. So again, I'm gonna kind of average it out at this is a fire book. Up next, let's do Ficciones by Borges. That is gonna be an all-time favorite. Again, Borges may not be for everyone, but if you are into the mysticism, surrealism, philosophical literature, then Borges is the writer for you. He has these, you know, he's a short story writer, I think, exclusively, and oftentimes he'll have a story that's like, you know, 5, 6, 7 pages, and it's very dense with like truly every sentence counts. But in that short span of time, he can just totally give you a philosophical gut punch. And every time I go back to one of his stories, I really do get something new out of it. Borges to me was just a totally original experience. Like, I have never read anything like Borges, and he's just also a fantastic writer. Borges is the GOAT. Ficciones is going to be an all-time favorite. That's my opinion. I don't think he's going to be everyone's cup of tea. Like, some stories, for instance, can be, you know, pretty difficult to read, but yeah, overall, he's getting that top spot. Also at a top spot, I just saw here, East of Eden by John Steinbeck, and this is just what I think of just like an all-time great classic piece of literature. Every single thing in this story is done well. The characters, the actual plot, how you get to see generation after generation, and also it does that thing where history itself is a character. Like, there's new techno, like the invention of cars takes place. You're just watching the world change around you, and there are some all-time amazing characters like, you know, Samuel and Lee, and the dialogue that takes place in this. Again, some of my favorite parts of the book is just sitting around the table and talking. I've read this book twice, but I've really been kind of itching for a reread to hit up East of Eden again. It is just that good. So it's going to be an all-time favorite. And let's move on to the next book, which is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. I'm going to give it as a fire book. For one, it's relatively short, and it's kind of just like this wide sweeping vision of this man's life, Siddhartha, and you watch him go on this whole spiritual journey. And I do think for what it is, it's a really good book. In fact, I would almost be tempted to put it on the amazing, but some of the writing isn't like amazing, although some of it definitely is. And you know, there's no real characters in here except Siddhartha, and you know, I've done a whole little video on this book, but I'm gonna put it as a fire book. And I think for other people, they'll probably actually like it more. This book can be really revolutionary for some people. And without further ado, let's get into the next book, which will be The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. At this point, it's probably been 5 years since I've read this book, but I also, just the feeling that I remember at the time really just loving it. And even just thinking about it now, it just has like a very soft spot in my heart. So I would love to give this book a reread, see if it holds up to the hype, and the thing is, I think it will. And if you've read this book, let me know. Banger. Did I put it in the right place up here? Okay, up next, let's do A Wizard of Earthsea, which is kind of like the Herman Hesse book. It's like it's the story of a young man who we see come of age. It is fantasy adjacent, like there's magic in here, but we also watch him go on what I would argue is another kind of like, you know, spiritual journey, but in the beautiful prose of Ursula K. Le Guin. The thing is, I actually feel like her prose doesn't really get to shine all that much because, like Siddhartha, it's just like this sweeping tale. Like there's no real scenes and like conversations. It's the story of a young man who, in the beginning of the book, kind of loosens this really evil magic which has deep psychological ties. He's basically at war with himself throughout this book. But I just feel like, because I don't know if it was too short or what it was, like I think if this was like a real Ursula K. Le Guin novel, this would be an absolute banger. But I think, in fact, I'm pretty sure she was commissioned to write this as like a young adult's novel. So just to kind of like put that into perspective. But anyway, still a good book. And in fact, while we're at it, let's do The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, because this is going to go as an amazing book. The premise is basically that there's like a colony on Mars that's completely anarchistic, like there's no rules. But the thing is, people kind of like socially converge upon like the same rules of a society. But you could literally just go up, kill. In fact, that's low-key an opening scene. Someone just gets killed and, you know, nobody does a thing. But the society ends up being actually very communal and kind of collectivistic. But at some point, the main character Shevek ends up going to Earth, and so we get this outside perspective onto like the humanly societies, and I think even particularly like the capitalism. And all of this to someone like Shevek is so, you know, alien in a sense, because they have a completely different society on the moon. So there's really great stuff. The characters, the philosophy, the actual story itself. This was I would definitely put this as like an amazing book. Let's do Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which I will also put as the amazing category. I ended up liking this book way more than I thought I would. The premise is it's low-key like these cowboys who live in Texas who are going on this whole journey, really an odyssey, you could say, of sorts, all the way up to, I think it's like Montana, and it's just this whole adventure. But on top of that, like completely besides that, what I think really makes this book shine is the characters, particularly the relationship between Gus and Call, and just like the dialogue between the whole crew. Like I think it feels like the first quarter or third of this book was literally just over the course of like a couple days, just them prepping to go on the trip. But that's where we get introduced to the characters and where the relationship between everybody really gets to shine and remains one of my favorite parts of the book. So yeah, and not to mention the whole rest of it. I've done a whole video on that, so if you want to see the thoughts, get there. That's one of the OGs. But so I'm gonna put it as an amazing book. Up next, let's do The Trumpet of Conscience by Martin Luther King Jr. I'm gonna put this as the amazing. It's a book full of speeches that Martin Luther King Jr. gave, and I think all of them were just really totally insightful and absolutely into modern society. And the rhetorical and literary style of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches make it just, even if you just read them as essays, like really great. But people like Martin Luther King Jr. or even Malcolm X or Sojourner Truth, when you see them give their speeches, there is an element of the spoken word which absolutely does not transfer onto the page. Just like the electric atmosphere and the interaction with the crowd and the cheering and how it will work its way up to a crescendo. And Martin Luther King Jr., like even what he does literally with his voice is something that is so integral to the spoken word experience. But again, you don't even see that on the page. And even so, I'm giving this book as an amazing, even just based off of the content itself. So shout out to MLK Jr. We did another video on him, get to that one. And because that video was called We Smoking Loud for Martin Luther King Jr., I had to tug the doobie one time for Martin Luther King Jr. So without further ado, let's get into the next book, which let's go with The Great Gatsby by what's his name, Fitzgerald, F. Scott Fitzgerald. I'm gonna say this is a fire book. Just the character study of Gatsby and the nature of like romanticization and love and, you know, all this different stuff. And I just remember it being well written, just a good time. So I'm gonna say it's a fire book. I don't think it hasn't stuck with me to the point where it's like an amazing, but you know, let me know what y'all think in the comments. Let's do up next, kind of because it's in that high school era, let's do Catcher in the Rye. I remember this as being a good book, but also having flaws. I feel like he's just too like edgy teenager, but at the same time, aren't we all a little bit edgy teenagers? So I might put this as fire. Does it have, I think I'd kind of have to reread it, but why don't I just put it as good book? Glad I read it, but it has flaws. All right, and since we're getting kooky off the doobie, why don't we do One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I also remember just being a fire book. I don't think it's quite at that amazing category, but I remember like the characters and the story and like, you know, the mental madhouse and the whole, especially like the ending of that book being really powerful in that sense. So I'm gonna say it's a fire book. Up next, let's go ahead and do Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. this is an all-time favorite. It is a challenging book, but I think this is where Cormac McCarthy's best writing comes out. The characters, the mystical aspects, you know, the nature of the judge and the supernatural stuff, but it's very gritty, it's very Southwest. There is of course a ton of violence in this book, but just because of the mystical nature of this whole book entwined with all its other themes, Blood Meridian is an all-time favorite. I've done a video on this, so get to that if you are interested for the full thoughts. But without further ado, let's go up next with Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. And I'm gonna put this as a fire book. I really love the idea with the gonzo journalism stuff where Hunter S. Thompson basically just trips balls and incorporates his own personal experience into the reporting of this event, which honestly has barely any reporting at all, but makes for a fantastic novel. I also thought the movie adaptation of this book felt very much in line with the feeling of the book, so Johnny Depp, so shout out to that. Those who have watched will know. And up next, let's go ahead and do The Handmaid's Tale, which I'm also just gonna put as a fire book. I could be convinced for amazing, but I feel like I would really need a reread to definitively put it there. But you know, tons of interesting things. I love the dystopia and like the feminist element of it. And this was a book that I remember in college I was way behind on my readings on. I'm like, bro, I don't want to do the homework, but I started doing it and I actually like went past the required part. So I definitely like this book. I think again I would need a reread to give the full decision on that, but that's still, I think that feels right. That feels right. So I am realizing there is no way I'm gonna get through all these in one sitting. So let's do one more. We'll do an intermission and then we'll come back to finish the list. So let's make it a good one. Let's do Bluebeard by Vonnegut. And I'm also gonna put this as a fire book. The funny thing about this is I've read that book 3 times and I don't know exactly why, because I don't even think it's like necessarily amazing like that. I think Vonnegut just has a very addicting writing style, and this book also is like very interesting. It's kind of loosely based off the story of Bluebeard. Like he's got this mysterious potato barn, and he's like this abstract expressionist painter. And while the story is interesting and Vonnegut's right, ultimately I'm just gonna leave it here. It's a fire book. All right, and we back like we never left. So let's get right into the next book, which is gonna be We Were the Mulvaneys by Joyce Carol Oates. I'm gonna put this as honestly, I'm kind of tempted to put it in the amazing. I remember really liking this book. It follows this one kind of particular event that takes place in the beginning of the book, and we just watch as that kind of spirals and ends up unraveling this whole family, but it does so in a way that's very like character focused and very interesting psychologically to see how each of these people react to the event in their own way. I could be content. I feel like it's a little more than just a fire book. That's the thing. This book was pretty dope as far as I'm remembering it. It wasn't too long ago. So I'm gonna put it in this category, and I feel okay about that. And then without further ado, let's get into the next book. I Am a Cat. Okay, this might just lead me to all of Soseki. So I'm a Cat by Soseki is, I've been kind of referring to it as like the Japanese Don Quixote, except like the character is like this cat. And I say it's like the Don Quixote because it's basically just him going on these like misadventures throughout the book. It's just like a cat's perspective on the outside world, but Soseki's writing is of course fantastic. I love all the characters in this book, and I found this book to be genuinely comical. I found myself laughing out loud at several different points in the book, and I just have very warm, fuzzy feelings of I Am a Cat by Soseki. And then I was gonna say, while we are on him, we have The Three-Cornered World, and then I'm looking for Kokoro. I think all of Soseki to me is just at that 1% amazing. Honestly, some of them could be the all-time favorites, but like I said, I think I need to do a reread. But Three-Cornered World is about this dude who just kind of like goes into like this mountainside inn, and there's like this mysterious woman, but really the book is about what I think are just like objectively beautiful descriptions of nature, but on top of that, the nature and philosophy of art. It actually reminded me a lot of The Picture of Dorian Gray, if that puts it into perspective. And again, all of this through Soseki's just fantastic writing. And then there's Kokoro, which is arguably his biggest. I mean, I might be tempted to put this in the all-time favorite. There's a really interesting story here with like the character. It's basically like this older man and then like this younger dude. And they end up taking on a sort of like apprenticeship, friendship, but the older guy has this, we can tell there's like a dark thing in his past, and we have no idea what it is, but we gradually come to learn throughout the book. But Sensei in this story is also just like a deeply wise individual. Honestly, the kid has his moments too, but Sensei reminds me almost of like a Confucius Master Kong kind of character, just in this way that he's very quiet and subdued and doesn't speak much, but when he does, it's just like an absolute banger. And then of course the story itself, and then we get a bunch of stuff with youth. So honestly, talking about it, I'm tempted to why don't we just do it? it. Fuck it. I'm feeling Kokoro as an all-time favorite, although with a little asterisk. Like I've said, I bet it will hold up to a reread, and in fact, I might get more out of it because I think that's what's happened with some of these books, like Blood Meridian and East of Eden. Okay, up next, let's go ahead and do The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I remember liking this book, but when I think back to it now, I don't have like these crazy strong reactions to it, but I do remember, like, you know, quite enjoying this book. In fact, I remember I was on vacation as I read it. But I think this is a fire book. I think that encapsulates my feelings about that as it stands right now. So let's do The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks. This to me is going to be in the 1% amazing, and partly that's because this book had a very like kind of personal impact on me with related to like the neuroscience stuff. This is arguably one of the books that got me into doing my neuroscience degree. It's basically a series of case studies by the one and only Oliver Sacks, who is a fantastic writer in his own right, but he's also a neuropsychologist, made huge advancements in the field, and he's talking about his experience and his own thoughts and reactions as he's working with these patients who have these fascinating cognitive disorders. I've talked about them at length. Get to my last video on the Big Nate review and just throughout the channel, so I'm not going to get into that here, but that's truly probably one of the big things that got me into cognitive neuroscience as a field. Up next, let's do Kindred. I remember this also just kind of being like a fire book. It's by Octavia Butler. I'll honestly be tempted to put this in here because I do remember really liking this book, but again, I think the way that I'm at, it seems like it fits in this tier right there. I have, however, been interested in reading The Parable of the Sower, which I think I might even enjoy more, so let me know if you've read that and if I should read that next by Octavia Butler. Okay, let's do We Have Always Lived in the Castles. Yeah, sorry, good book, glad I read it, but it has flaws. Honestly, I hate to say it, I would almost put it in mid. I'm not going to do Shirley Jackson like that. I like her writing when it's good. She is able to create that just uncanny feeling of like weirdness and that element of horror. But the problem with this book for me is that I found the whole story just kind of like very slow. The writing could be kind of over descriptive, and it's like, okay, I'm reading these pages and there's some cool vibes, but nothing is happening low-key. That was just my thought. But yeah, I did find that book honestly a bit of a slog to get through. But I do fuck with Shirley Jackson. Maybe her form, there's a lot of people like this where they write better, and this is just my opinion, I'm not saying this is true, but they write better short stories, and when they make a novel it might not be as good. Like, I'm both glad and not glad in a way that Borges never wrote a novel, put it that way. But all right, let's get to the next book, which we shall do as No Country for Old Men. I'm gonna put this also as a fire book. I enjoyed it. It's got a lot of the core Cormac elements with like the dialogue and the characters and the Southwest vibes. Like, I almost would recommend people start with this book if you're interested in McCarthy, because it's, I think, also his easiest. And shout out the movie. And that's actually related to, I think, one of the things that, it's not even a critique of the book, I just wish it had kind of gone deeper with the characters in the story. It's also relatively short, and I think it was made actually to be a motion, like I think it was supposed to be started as a screenplay. I still really enjoyed it. I would absolutely reread this book, and I found it to be fun too, kind of like, you know, page turner, but you still get that Cormac McCarthy style. So all right, up next, let's do As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. I'm also just gonna put this as a fire book. Honestly, I might say it has flaws, but I did really enjoy this book. Again, it has that classic Faulkner style and way easier to read than something like The Sound of the Fury. So yeah, I liked As I Lay Dying. It does a lot of interesting things with form, and you have, you know, the I Am a Fish chapter. If you know, you know. Up next, let's go ahead and do Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. You know, some of you might be surprised to hear this is one of my least favorite Vonnegut books. That being said, it's still good. Like, I've read it twice, but it has been many years since I had a reread, and I think for me it was almost just too serious. Like, for me, because it's related, there's like time travel and stuff, but this is very much like a book about World War II, and I think I like Vonnegut more when he gets into like the science, fantastic, philosophical elements, which it is here. Like, again, I just mentioned there's time travel, but yeah, maybe I need a reread, maybe it'll be higher, but that's where I'm putting it for now. Let's do Modern Man in Search of a Soul, which honestly for me might be an all-time favorite. Anything by Jung, to be frank, is probably going to be up here, but this book especially I think is a nice little kind of intro reader to a lot of his main ideas. It can get a bit academic at times, but if you really read this book, you know, you will find that Carl Jung is a deeply mystical, supernatural person, and everyone's kind of interested in the nature of dreams and the mind, and especially this emphasis on how all this applies in the modern world. Modern Man in Search of a Soul. So that's going to be an all-time favorite for me. Let's do Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. I'm going to put this as an amazing book. It has been many years since I read it, which was for a class like the Great American Novels, but I remember this book having a very big impact on me. I've been tickling practically with the idea of doing a reread on this for a long time. And I say a tickle because it's like an itch. Like I feel like I really need to scratch it. So anything that's able to evoke that feeling in me, I think that couldn't be anything less than an amazing book. And maybe after a reread, you might find it at the all-time favorites. Speaking of all-time favorite, I'm gonna put Cosmos up here, and it might not be everyone's cup of tea. This is a popular science fiction about just the nature of the universe. He's just so good at putting the mystery of the universe into its proper mystical perspective, and the scale of the cosmos and all these cool things with the black holes and galaxies and the creation of life. Like, he just covers all the main interesting questions about science, like philosophically, in this book, and he's just a fantastic writer. What more could you want? Up next, we got, let's do Teaching a Stone to Talk, which I'm going to put as a fire book. And there's some essays in here that I think are amazing. But as an average, I think as a collective text, I'd put it somewhere halfway. I'm going to tend towards, this is a fire book. But while we are at it, let's do Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, also by Annie Dillard. I'm going to say good book, glad I read it, but it did have flaws. I remember the beginning particularly, but also the ending of this book just being absolutely fantastic. But everything in the middle just kind of like fell flat. The premise is kind of like Walden style. She goes to this cabin in Virginia or something, and just is out there meditating on nature, and there are some really great insights in this book. But I feel like at times my critique part, the flaw, is that it can kind of just be like nature description after nature description after nature description. But there is some very great stuff in here, so it's a good book. I am glad I read it. I might even reread it, hell, but it did have flaws. Okay, up next, let's do The Bell Jar, which to me was just a fire book. I did a whole video on this, so if you want to hear my thoughts for real about it, but it's essentially like the story of a young woman who is living in a society that's not super fond of women, and she's also like basically depressed, and it's just like everywhere she goes she is limited in some way, and just also the nature of depression, she does a fantastic job of just making you feel that. Personally, this book is gonna be land just fire category. I don't know if it was quite amazing territory for me. I feel like if she was able to develop her style more, because this was her first novel and it ended up already being such a classic, so you can only imagine if she got a second or third. Okay, up next, let's do The Interpretation of Dreams by Sigmund Freud. I'm gonna kind of just put this here. Good book, glad I read it, but it has flaws. There are chunks of this book which are just almost downright unreadable in so many different ways. Sometimes it just gets too academic. Sometimes he's going through just dream after dream. Every time he's making the most absurd reaches, like, oh, this clearly represents the phallus, and this clearly represents the mother's womb. And it's just like, okay, bro, you were doing way too much. And you have this weird fixation on the sex stuff. On the other hand, there are, for one, passages of this book that I think are absolutely brilliant. And just in terms of like importance, this is one of the foundational texts that really took the idea of the unconscious, and also a relation between the unconscious and dreams, but also the idea that dreams could have any actual psychological meaning at all. That was completely more or less, ridiculed in the field, and Freud did a lot and got a lot of shit for it. But the interpretations of dreams was a huge step towards honestly the creation, birth of psychoanalysis. So you do have to give Freud his flowers. So I'm gonna leave it here. I don't know. Like I said, some passages are my all-time favorite, but overall, as a text itself, it has flaws. Okay, up next, let's do The Reader by, I don't even know, it's like Bernard something, huh? I just remember this book being completely mid. The plot is basically, I remember there was like an older woman sleeping with like a pretty younger guy, if I remember, and just this whole blah, 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 blah. I honestly don't remember much more about it, except just this feeling I have that it was not that good. So, okay, up next, let's do Man and His Symbols while we're talking about the psychoanalysis stuff. I'm going to put this as amazing. Jung is only the first chapter of this book, and it is an absolute banger, fantastic passage, except it's pretty much the undiscovered self. Okay, so sorry, let's break this down here. The first chapter of Man and His Symbols, I read it close to when I also read The Undiscovered Self, and there's tons of, they are slightly different, but I feel like one was a draft for the other, or just slight variations of. The chapter that Jung has, I think is fantastic, so I'm going to put this as an all-time favorite. It's just like a very nice, condensed, again, in a modern setting to the basic principles of psychoanalysis. And in Man and His Symbols, it's basically like his intellectual proteges, each writing a chapter about things related to just everything that I've been talking about. So I'm going to put The Undiscovered Self. The thing is, it's paired with another book, like The Interpretation of Symbology and Dreams. It's like kind of a 2-in-1, but I'm just gonna, this is sufficient for my purposes here. Up next, we are going to do A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. This, for me, is going to be a 1% amazing, and I've read it twice. I remember really liking it both times, but again, it's been many years. Those were my college days. This book specifically is one that kind of like got me be into literature, so it might be biased by the fact that it was like that was the moment, the book that opened up this whole new world for me. But like I said, I read it twice, and I'm pretty sure, I feel like I need to give it a reread, but for me, I put it in the amazing category. Up next, we have The Trial by Franz Kafka, which I kind of want to put in here. I just read it for the second time. The problem with this book is that it's technically unfinished, and I feel like that does come out a little bit. Like, I can see where Kafka was going, and even with like the rough draft version, I'm tempted to just kind of like put it in amazing, because he captures so well this feeling of surreal, as this blend between the totally absurd and yet like the everyday mundane, and you treat the absurd as mundane. The whole premise of this book is basically that in a nutshell, but I'm not going to talk about it here. I'll talk about it more at length. Let's get to the next book, which we will do. The Storyteller Essays by Walter Benjamin. This is a book almost of like philosophy of literary criticism, which I've talked extensively also about on the channel. Just the nature of story itself, how back in the day it used to be done orally and in a community, whereas now with the novel it's a totally solitary experience. So, you know, stuff like that, yada yada yada. At times I feel like it does get a little academic, you know, too abstract art critique, but no, it's honestly, I'd be tempted to even put it up here, but for now I'm gonna leave it at, you know, this is a fire book. Up next, Joan Didion, The Year of Magical Thinking. I'm also kind of tempted to put this on the amazing, but I think just the way I'm feeling about it right now, this is a fire book. It is nonfiction of Joan Didion. Basically, the beginning of the book starts with her husband having a stroke, and then like a week or two later, or before, very close, something tragic happened with her daughter. And Joan Didion just, I feel like, does a great job of capturing the grief. And she's also just a very beautiful, eloquent writer. Like, her sentences really do have a flow and a cadence that, like, when you finish them, I don't know, I feel like I would be able to distinctly identify her sentence work. And so, like, almost for that, it's almost that reason I want to put her as amazing. But let's wait on a reread. I'll put it as this is a fire book. Okay, James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. I remember this. This is going to be an all-time favorite. And while we're at it, let me just talk about the Baldwin bros here. Giovanni's Room was a piece of fiction, and it's basically like dealing with these themes of homosexuality, and it's also in Paris during this particular time period. And there's this relationship with Giovanni. Again, I've made a whole video about this. I'm going to put this as just like, you know, the amazing. He just speaks so insightfully about the black experience and racism in the, whenever he was writing, I'm gonna say 1960s, 70s, something like that. I might put it in amazing just because I feel like I might need a reread to really set that as an all-time favorite. And both of those books are relatively short, but man, do they pack a punch. And up next, we will do The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. I'm just gonna put this as a fire book. I remember it being good. I know it gets a lot of hate, but it's just like a simple story with this man going fishing, and it's this relationship between the old man and the sea, and you know, it's kind of like Moby Dick style. You know, he gets this catch and it ends up, you know, we'll leave it there. I don't think it's anything particularly special by Hemingway, so for that reason I'm just gonna, you know, it's a fire book. This is, you know, it's a banger, but at the end of the day it's not quite at that top tier. Up next, let's do The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which I'm not going to throw it in mid. I'm going to put it as good book, glad I read it, but it has flaws, because there are some really interesting ideas with like the existentialism and the philosophy, but a lot of this book just really fell flat for me, which reasons I've also talked about extensively in another video. A recent read is Pedro Páramo by Juan Rulfo, and I'm going to put this also as a fire book. I thought it was going to be in the amazing all-time favorite category, the way it was shaping out to be, because it's got like these magical elements and it's totally surreal. I see not inspiration, you can tell, I feel like it inspired something like 100 Years of Solitude with this magical town, village, community. But I honestly just found a lot of the book confusing. Like, if you've read it, it's very disorienting. He won't give you the context. Like, oh, there'll be a whole conversation with the character and you don't even know who the character is. For vibes, I would give it, you know, amazing, all-time favorite, but as an overall book, I'm gonna leave it as a, you know, fire. And I do want to check out some of his short stories. Okay, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel here. Let's speed run through these last few. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. I kind of remember this as being amazing, and while we're at it, let's put Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. These are two stories, one which is an autobiography of Viktor Frankl in the concentration camps. One is a piece of fiction, but by somebody who really did undergo the gulag in the Soviet Union. So we got like real life inspired fiction, and we have like very literary autobiography. If anything, I'm actually tempted to put Man's Search for Meaning down in the fire book, because the reason I want to leave it here is it has so many good ideas. I feel like I'm constantly talking about this book, but just as a text, honestly, I might put this as a fire book, because One Day of the Life of Ivan Denisovich, I feel like that one's a really top tier book. Okay, up next, let's do 1984 by George Orwell. And honestly, it's just, this was one of those high school books. I remember having, you know, I remember it being a fire book. If anything, It might have flaws because I specifically remember actually, and this might have just been high school brain Nate, but there was this whole period where he finds like the book with the brotherhood, and I just remember that part dragging like a mofo. But just because this book is so influential and it's so prophetic of so much of what's going on in modern society, I feel like we got to just throw it in as a fire book. Up next, let's do, oh yeah, we still got a Borges up here. We got The Aleph and Other Stories. I already kind of talked about Borges. He is my short story mystical goat, so of course for me, this book's gonna be an all-time favorite. All right, let's do Cat's Cradle next by Kurt Vonnegut. I'm also gonna put this in the, you know, not quite 1%, but amazing, because I read this book around the same time as I read Sirens of Titan, and both of these were, you know, for the same reasons that I like Sirens of Titan. The science fiction, very creative ideas through which he's able to explore, like, through all these philosophical ideas, and also just like that compulsive readability of Vonnegut. It's simple, it's fun, but at the same time, it's, you know, it's very deep. Okay, up next, let's do 100 Years of Solitude. And this for me is also going to be an all-time favorite by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And this is really a testament to the fact that sometimes books need to come at the right time and at the right place in your life. Because I tried reading this when I first started community college, and I got like a quarter, a third, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. I have no, because the names get kind of tricky, and it was just like a little too difficult for me. But a couple years ago, I ended up picking this up totally on a whim too, just like absolutely random, spur of the moment decision, and I just fell in love with it. Like the writing and the supernatural, fantastical, magical realism elements, and on top of that, you just get to see this whole, the Buendia family really, generation after generation. It's kind of like East of Eden in that way, except it spans like, I think it's over like a whole century, and you see like the founding of this village, and then ultimately, you know, I'm not gonna say anything, but we get to see the whole trajectory of the Buendia family and the village that they live in, and just you know, I love this book through and through, so it's gonna be an all-time favorite. Up next, let's do The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, which I remember this just being a fire book. Honestly, I think if I reread it, it could be bumped up here, but for whatever reason, I read this and A Farewell to Arms kind of around the same time, and I just remember personally A Farewell to Arms having a notably larger impact than The Sun Also Rises, but that was also my first Hemingway book ever, so maybe it was just like, you know, the novelty of it. Anyway, I should reread both of them and calibrate their ranking. Okay, up next, we are going to do A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. And I'm going to put this just kind of as a fire book. It's about the universe, the beginning of the universe. It's kind of like Cosmos Light, to be honest. And that's why I'm kind of putting it a little bit lower, is because where I feel like Cosmos is, it's still a great book. Don't get me wrong. I kind of feel like I'm talking bad about Stephen Hawking. But at times it did get a little technical, and it just didn't quite have the, you know, the light. So maybe it could be around here, but for now I'm just going to put it, this is a fire book. Okay, up next, The Uncanny by Sigmund Freud, which is a series of essays, the main one of which is like a psychoanalysis of Leonardo da Vinci through his paintings. Even if you don't agree with it, I feel like it's actually a very interesting text. Definitely talks about a lot of the basic principles of psychoanalysis, and we get Freud's view on art, and I remember liking all the other essays as well. So I'm gonna put this as, honestly, I could see this being as amazing. I don't know if I'm gonna say all that, but you know, at its best, I think it's amazing. At its best, I think it's amazing. But let's just for now put it as a fire book. Up next, A Good Man Is Hard to Find. I'm also gonna, honestly, for a while, this has been in my amazing category, and there are some really amazing stories in this collection, but I think as an overall text, you know, some of them don't hit as hard. So I'm gonna put this as a fire book. I love Flannery O'Connor's use of Southern Gothic and the dialogue, and there's some really weird, disturbing things that happen in this book. Okay, we're coming to a close here. A Clockwork Orange. I don't remember it being like a particularly amazing book or anything, and Anthony Burgess even says that in the intro. He's kind of pissed that this is the one that blew up because it's his least favorite that he wrote. I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. So All the Pretty Horses, I'm putting this as amazing, and that might be personal experience. And this is the thing, you know, as much as I try and separate it, I think it is a factor. I read this while I was camping, and the weather was so amazing, and I really do remember this book just being fantastic. And again, I don't know if it was just the vibes, but when I finished that book, I'm like, honestly, I kind of want to just literally reread this book. So, and I never ended up doing it. So let me know if I'm just overreacting, if it was vibe based, about All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. And then up next and last, however, but not least, A Movable Feast. Ooh, bars right there, by Ernest Hemingway, which I'm gonna put, we're kind of ending on a fizzle here. It's not even, I actually really like it. I would be tempted to put it in amazing, but I just don't think it quite gets there. The whole book is no plots, just vibes. It's basically just semi-autobiographical Hemingway living his life in Paris and the homies and the vibe of it all. I'm pretty sure in the book he's also a writer, but also a little fun fact, this was given to me by my math teacher, because I was reading on bro when she was like teaching. I would use the cover of someone's back and just be, but also I didn't do very well in math, imagine that. But anyway, she noticed this and turned it in a positive light, and she gave me A Movable Feast. Shout out Miss Nogales. But on a final note, this here is our tier list. What all do we think of this? I feel like at an eye's glance, it's not bad. I might make some tweaks here or there. And again, we've talked about a lot of rereads, but I think this is a nice little survey of my taste and my history with some of the greatest modern classics. Let me know what books should be on here. If you like this kind of video, maybe I'll do one for, like, you know, the actual classics. And thank you guys so much for pulling up this video. I'm sure you're subscribed, so I'm not even gonna say it. It'd be a moot point. But if you happen to, on the 1% chance, haven't, please smash that subscribe. Get to the second channel, the Big Nate Review. I've been posting dope stuff there. And we also just started a live reading club on Twitch. So if that interests you, we got all the details down below. But in the meantime, thank you guys for watching Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews.